Thank you, comrade. Okay, so now we're going to go to our producer because there's quite a few questions coming in. And our producer is Kurt Young out in Mississauga.
So we start off by asking a question from Barry Weisletter, who asks, what would you panelists say is the most important change that we need? Beyond the eradication of capitalism, what is the most urgent change needed in your view? Second question comes from our comrade YC, and he asks, tomorrow lowering question, 2 days ago, Setsko Thurlow called on Trudeau to sign the UN nuclear ban treaty. Besides yourself, can you mention other strong progressive women against endless war and protectors of the earth that we should be paying attention to? How can we act as allies to amplify their message of hope? And our last question comes from Daniel Terade, who asks, can the Greek comrade elaborate on the process by which schools are models for after factories in capitalist society?
Okay, so we'll go to our first panelist, Costas.
Yes, okay. And in fact, if I understand well, I mean, what I was not properly understood. I said that factories are models for schools, not that schools are models for factory. I said that the division of labor is decided on the factory, I mean, is implemented on the factory level, and schools are following. Therefore, changes in the education system are following the changes in the organization of the economy. That's my view of how education is organized. In fact, I'm following the international movement of critical education. I am one of the organizers of the international conferences on critical education and critical pedagogy in Europe. And what we are saying is that we have to follow a different model of education. In fact, to disconnect this ring between factory and schools have to become places or spaces for developing critical thinking and critical consciousness in order to prepare students to be part of this great movement to transform, to change society and transform social relations. I mean, that's my idea. And then I will skip the second question, and I will try to answer the question by Barry. And what is the most urgent change needed? And I think for the time being, the spearhead of the attack of the capitalist class is the disorganization of the social space of the working class. And I think in order to be prepared to fight back, we have to resist this effort. We have to stand by the working class. I mean, in order that the working class stay coherent and not be disorganized. They do not let this social rationalism and social distancing promoted as a main policy by the capitalists to disorganize the working class. We have to resist this, and we have to defend social coherence, and we have to state first that the working class has to defend its existence, and the working class can't be saved by the working class alone. That's my idea. That's what I think that it is the most urgent need this period to combat the capitalist offensive. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. Tamara?
I think one of the most important things that we can do, along with challenging capitalism, is challenging militarism. We need to push the Canadian government to demilitarize, to move the money from the Department of National Defense to our urgent social and environmental problems. Militarism is literally, it's killing people, it's killing the planet, and it's killing hope. We need to get serious about demilitarization. We need to be able to say that, and we need to push the political parties to take this on. There is just simply no way we are going to be able to deal with the climate crisis if we continue to invest in, fossil fuel powered militarism. If Canada buys 88 new fighter jets for a minimum cost of $19 billion, they are so polluting, so destructive to the climate. There's just no way that we can say that Canada is decarbonizing and meeting the Paris Agreement. So demilitarization is absolutely vital to our work, and it really needs to be one of the central pillars, along with decolonization and socialism. And in terms of this new UN treaty to ban nuclear weapons, it's because of Canada's membership in NATO that Canada is not joining this critical new treaty to abolish the worst weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons. We cannot respond to a nuclear weapons attack. I mean, everything is obliterated. The only option for us to eliminate the risk of nuclear weapons is to eliminate nuclear weapons. And this is why this treaty is so important. But in 2016, as countries were adopted a resolution to negotiate this treaty, the United States sent a letter to all of the NATO allies to say, do not participate in these negotiations. Canada did not participate in the negotiations, for this new UN treaty to ban nuclear weapons, and Canada is refusing to sign on to this treaty right now. We are facing two existential crises: the climate crisis and the continuing threat of nuclear weapons. In terms of women's organizations that are working to try to get Canada to join this treaty and to take nuclear disarmament seriously. Of course, the organization that I'm with, the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, has been working on this issue for 60 years. Internationally, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom has also been working very hard for nuclear disarmament. And in fact, in 2017, it was our organizations, we're part of this broader network called the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN. Our organizations won the Nobel Peace Prize. And it was Setsuko Thurlow, a Japanese-Canadian woman, who accepted that Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of civil society. And do you know that our Prime Minister is refusing to meet with Setsuko Thurlow? Canada, by virtue of our membership in NATO, we are a nuclear armed state. NATO is refusing to get rid of its nuclear weapons. It relies on a nuclear deterrence, and it has a first strike use policy. So it is mission critical. It is absolutely essential for us to push for Canada out of NATO and to join with allies like the No to NATO network to dismantle the Atlantic Alliance. So that's what I would like to see. I think peace and nonviolence needs to be essential to the work that we're doing as activists across the country.
Thank you, Tamara. Bryn?
Thank you. Well, when it comes down to the most important change that we need, I struggle. There's so many issues. Just as Tamara pointed out, militarism in our society is a huge problem. We spend far too much on our military for what we are. And I think that also, I want to build on that point a little bit. It derives from a lack of understanding about what Canada is, how it behaves on the world stage, and what our economy is based on. We are, for all intents and purposes, a petrostate. We are a state that relies on oil and increasingly a real estate bubble in order to remain solvent and in order to boost our GDP. I don't think many Canadians understand that. I don't think many Canadians get the implications of that. I don't think they understand why it is that, you know, we're intervening in Haiti. Like, why are we pressuring the Venezuelan government? And why were we one of the first to support the Bolivian coup d'etat? They don't understand because they think of ourselves as peacekeepers. We think of ourselves as peacekeepers. And then when actions happen that totally contradict that, it's simply ignored. It's not discussed. It's not reported by the media. So that is a big issue. But for me, I think what it comes down to is the issues that I can help resolve immediately, or we can work to resolve immediately. So for me, that's the housing crisis and that's the opioid crisis. Here in BC, it's killing so many people. Opioid overdoses have actually killed far more people than COVID has here in this province in 2020 so far. And the crisis was building from 2016 onwards and even earlier. So what all of this comes down to is we have to build a society and build an economy that puts our people first. We have to build housing for everybody who needs it. We have to make sure that people aren't dying from diseases of despair, like opioid overdoses and suicides. All of these have to happen immediately. They have to be implemented immediately. They can happen within capitalist society, but capitalist society will simply generate new problems. There will simply be something new to occur. If we defeat climate change without defeating capitalism, capitalism will come into a new crisis that is even more severe. If we manage to solve the housing problem without defeating capitalism, capitalism will find some new way, some new market to enter into in order to survive. It mutates and it continues onwards. I think a lot of people refer to the modern era as late capitalism, and I think that's a little optimistic. I don't think capitalism is going to go away anytime soon. It's extremely adaptable, not only with its internal complications, but because of its internal complications. It is prepared to move into any segment of society that it can in order to perpetuate itself. We have to be ready for that. We have to do what we can to help people in the moment with the resources that we have. We just have to be prepared to stick up for each other and defend one another. But we have to recognize that doing so does not guarantee an end to the problems that we face.
Kathy?
Yeah, so I think we have to definitely change government priorities. I think education should be priority number one. Dismantling anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, Islamophobia, and all forms of discrimination. I think it's critical to decolonize education, and it is essential that we learn about each other's cultures and their histories, and not only the Eurocentric curriculum. I think when we speak about the change in education system following the changes in the factory, I think schools were designed to turn out people to fill jobs in factories, and they were designed for specific jobs. But the world we're living in now, we need to be educating our students for jobs that aren't even created yet. So I think as schools, we need to prepare students for this, to be critical thinkers, right? I also think that the world is shrinking. And with the advent of social media, the fact that it's here to stay. So many students are getting many more narratives, this fake news concept. It is so important to be able to decipher fact from fiction, look at your sources, even when you're getting all these reports and studies done, who are the people behind funding it to train our children to be really mindful. So for example, somebody might say, the cure for a particular illness may be eating blueberries, but is it the Blueberries Farmers Association that have put out this report? So we really need to be critical thinkers. I think just the fact that, I like to say we're in two pandemics. So the pandemic of racism was here long before COVID, and COVID will pass. but our racism pandemic will continue if we are not very decisive and strategic in ending racism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now we're going to go back to our producer, Kurt.
Okay, so our first question comes from Abby C. And she said, could unions joining together be a force for uniting workers around the world? Our next question comes from Ross Gertzen, who asked for Cassie. Could you speak on the role of educational elitism and how we could move away from education as a meritocracy that favors white people or of financial means? Our next question comes from John Orritt. The carbon emission of the US military, I am told, is larger than many medium-sized nations. Is this true? And our final question for this round comes from Dustin Brown, who asks, what are the positions of the bourgeois parties in Canada on military spending?
Okay, Kathy?
Yeah, so I'm going to start, I'm really going to tackle Ross's question, because that's one of the things I'm very passionate about, because I think it's important to rethink just, for example, how we train our teachers, right? So, and what we value in kids learning, and also how we see our students. And I think that's the beauty of public education, because public education is supposed to be that for the public. Now, when you look at how it was designed, I remember attending demonstrations and people would say the system isn't broken, it was built this way, right? It is so important to ensure that in public education, we go back to what it's supposed to be, which is education for all people, right? And it is so important to make sure every story is valued. It is so important when you look at the curriculum, how teachers, you look at the pedagogy, how instruction is delivered, how teachers assess and what they value. And all that comes in changing with policies. It comes from, for example, revamping success criteria. What does success look like in a particular scenario? It's no longer has to be like, for example, I remember when, I was going to school and you do a project, it was basically the person who had the most money who built the most elaborate display and project and brought to school. It didn't matter that half the time it was your parents doing it or assisting you with it. It didn't really reflect the child's ability. So looking at what are we assessing? What skills are we looking for? Right? And I think it's very important that all school systems, and some places they call it school districts, come on board, because it's so important when you look even, for example, at how we want our kids of the future to be. So it's not going to be only, the people that can, let's say, I have the most money, so I build the biggest project, but we want our students to be critical thinkers, to be able to be problem solvers and creativity, because that's also a huge need, right, in jobs of the future. Collaboration. So I think there are a lot of skills, and what I call hard skills and soft skills also, that in an education system that we need to focus and pay more attention to. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, Bryn?
Thank you. I really like all these questions. I wish I had a little more time.
Well, we got 4 minutes, comrade.
All right, we're going with it. So unions joining together could be a force for uniting workers around the world. I think they could be, for sure. My main worry is that a lot of the top union brass can be very conservative. They don't see the need for international solidarity, and in fact can often work against it. Unifor, when GM was moving jobs out of Ontario into Mexico, responded by calling for a boycott on all Mexican-produced cars, which A, how is anybody supposed to know which cars are Mexican-produced or not? And B, it reinforces the capitalist idea, which is of an international labor market and we're all competing with each other, when instead the workers of the world should be uniting together to make common demands and common cause. Campaigns like that really hurt that kind of solidarity building. So I do believe that unions joining together could be a force for uniting workers, but at the same time, you do have to overcome the conservatism of the union leadership in a lot of cases. The carbon emissions of the U.S. military, I'm told, is larger than many medium-sized nations. Is this true? Yes. And especially when you consider what they're blowing up and how much it costs to rebuild the devastation that they leave behind. Virtually none of the U.S. military is carbon efficient. But what's funny is that it leads down interesting paths. I know Elizabeth Warren, for instance, her campaign platform wasn't to end U.S. militarism or to scale it back. It was to put more solar panels on the tanks and to use more like, I don't know, solar powered like tents, basically. There wasn't an actual interest in ending the institution of militarism. There was an interest in just making it greener and friendlier, which we know that's not the prescription. We know that we have to scale down the U.S. war machine in order to secure world peace. And so the fourth, what are the positions of the bourgeois parties in Canada on military spending? The positions of the parties are pretty much uniformly whatever the military wants, we'll give it to them. The military complains a lot about, oh, we're being underfunded. Oh, we don't have this, we don't have that. Yet, as Tamara's presentation pointed out, we spend a great deal more on the military than we do on fighting climate change. We spend it on frivolous purchases like the F-35, which was at one point nicknamed the flying guillotine because in tests for pilots, there was a 1 in 4 chance of them being decapitated if they attempted to eject in an emergency. Like, this is the kind of thing that we're spending all of our money on. Its code name was the Lightning, and yet it was delayed for 3 years because whenever it was hit by lightning, all the engines and electronics would switch off and the plane would crash. There's no sense there. It's purely, honestly, I would have to spend a lot more than the remaining time that I have to discuss what I actually think about it. But I think for the liberals and conservatives, the conservatives are in favor of increased military spending. The liberals are also in favor of increased military spending, but with a friendlier face, like a feminist foreign policy, as if, you know, the women don't also die from bombs that are dropped by our planes. But the NDPs, more or less, well, we haven't really thought about that. I guess we'll just go with whatever the military wants.
30 seconds.
I think, okay, thank you. I think that's actually a weakness of the federal NDP. I think there's a lot of opportunities for them to differentiate themselves on foreign policy that they don't take. And I think what it comes down to is an assumption that, well, we're never taking power anyways. So who cares what we think about foreign policy? Who cares what we think about all of these things? But as I've mentioned before, Canadians think of themselves as peacekeepers. While that hurts our understanding of what our country does, it can help our understanding of what our country can do. And I think having a non-interventionist foreign policy, having a military policy that winds down our investments can be a huge draw to a workers' party. And I think that it's a huge chance for them to differentiate themselves. So for me, that's what I think about those questions. And they're all very good. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Bren. Okay, Tamara?
So as I showed in my chart, that under the Liberals and the Conservatives, military spending has dramatically increased over the past 20 years. And under the Liberals' 2017 defense policy, we're going to be spending, you know, over $553 billion on new weapon systems and more military interventions. When that policy came out, the Green Party said nothing. Silence is acquiescence. The NDP, Randall Garrison, the defense critic, actually said that this spending is not enough. The NDP's position is that they would like to see even greater military spending. So I am urging people on this call who are involved in the Green Party and the NDP to push them on reducing military spending and reallocating it to social environmental programs that we desperately need in this country. I also want to say that unions in this country, most of them are also very supportive of military spending. So for instance, the union that operates in London in London that's helping to build the light armored vehicles at the General Dynamics plant, are very supportive of military spending and arms exports. The unions in Quebec, where a lot of the aerospace and defense sector corporations are based, are extremely supportive of Canadian militarism. And so I'm also appealing to unions and to workers to reflect critically about supporting militarism and to think about conversion. I mean, we absolutely need to convert our aerospace and defense sector into building technologies and building things that we need, that Bryn was alluding to, and to building things like affordable housing and healthcare and schools and recreation centers that are needed across this country. There's an organization called Labor Against the Arms Trade that is trying to raise awareness about the possibility for conversion and appealing to labor and to unions to get serious about becoming allies for peace and nonviolence in this country. And then finally, on the question about the U.S. military, and climate change, the U.S. military spends between $8 and $17 billion on fuel. It is the largest institutional consumer of fossil fuels on the planet. We know this from repeated congressional testimony. Last year, Brown University Costs of War Project released a study called Pentagon Fuel Use and Climate Change. I'd encourage you to have a look at this study. And it's in that study that they tried to estimate what the U.S. military's carbon emissions are. And based on their assessment, they say that the U.S. military emits more carbon emissions than 146 countries. And at its level of military emissions, it emits as many emissions as middle-sized countries like Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. But those countries have about 5 million people. The U.S. military is only 2 million soldiers. So the U.S. military has a massive carbon footprint. And then I'll just end by saying that among all federal agencies and institutions in this country, it's the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces that emits most of the carbon emissions. The Canadian military is also one of the largest consumers of hazardous material and producers of hazardous waste, and it has the most contaminated sites in this country. So militarism is extremely pernicious to the environment, and that is why demilitarization to save the planet and to save people is absolutely vital.
Thank you, Tamara. Costas?
Yes, concerning the first question about uniting workers through the unions, through the trade unions. I mean, there is a historical experience, the International of the Trade Unions, that was an international coordination of trade unions and workers' unions around the world, and that was a policy of the Third International in the 30s, and this union and this international fall apart due to Stalinist intervention. But it was not only due to Stalin's intervention that this international fall apart. We have to look through unions, workers' unions or trade unions are as defensive organizations of the working class. They cannot take combat initiatives as such. Moreover, trade unions are governed by trade unions bureaucracy. So it is not in the interest of the trade union bureaucracy to unite the workers globally. What is the tool that we need to unite the workers globally are revolutionary parties of the working class, mass revolutionary parties of the working class, and an international of revolutionary parties that is going to coordinate the struggles of workers internationally. Now I come over to the second question. Education is an ideological state apparatus, and as such is in close contact with state policy. education, and in fact, the curricula, the official curricula put forward by governments, are designed centrally, and in fact, their main purpose is to promote neoliberal policy into education. What is the neoliberal policy for education? Education is under attack by neoliberalism, and this started by Thatcher in Britain in the late 70s. And the main policy of neoliberalism in education is to promote skills in the expense of knowledge. This is what the Secretary of Education of Thatcher in 1979 voiced explicitly in the UK, that skills, not knowledge. And why skills? Either soft skills or hard skills. Because schools have to prepare a flexible working force to work in the factories. We don't have to educate in terms of knowledge, in terms of theoretical and abstract thinking, but we have to concentrate on knowledge, because a worker in the factory has to be prepared to use her skills to change his work or his job, 3 or 4 or even 10 times in his work life. And we have to combat neoliberalism in education. And we have to combat the OECD policies, because the normalization of education to the policy of neoliberalism passes through the PISA test and the OECD policies in education. So either we develop a coherent critique of OECD and neoliberalist policies in education, or we are defensive but we accept our fate. And so if we want to make a breakthrough in education, we have to combat the neoliberal policy. And the first step to combat the neoliberal policy is to re-educate teachers, re-educate the educators. The educator must be educated again. This is what Marx said, and this is up to this day, a very sound saying. Okay, educators have to be transformative intellectuals. So we have to work in the trade unions of the educators union and the teachers union. Okay, I'm off. We have to concentrate our political work to teachers. We have to prepare the new teacher, the teacher of the future, the teacher who is be an intellectual, an organic and transformative intellectual. That's my point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, comrade. Okay, so we're going to hear our last 4 questions now. So, Kurt?
All right, our first question comes from Stephen Crozier. He asks, are you aware of the organization World Beyond War? Our question comes from our comrade YC. Second question for Kathy. How come you do not advocate for abolish the police, having worked with core group of NPPC, No Pride in Police Coalition? I say you don't go far enough. What's your response? Question from Dustin Brown. Where are the vulnerable points of the military-industrial manufacturing sector in Canada? Is General Dynamics in London a potential point of focus for organizing? And Galen Ash asks, can the speakers provide contact info for follow-up questions? And I'll add to this quickly, is that if you do have contact information you wish to share, please put it in the chat and we will put it in the profile. Thank you.
Okay, so 4 minutes and only 4 minutes to the panelists. Tamara?
Yes, I do know World Beyond War. It's an excellent organization. It's based in the United States, but it has chapters and allied organizations around the world. There is actually a World Beyond War Canadian coordinator. Her name is Rachel Small, and she's absolutely excellent. The next World Beyond War webinar will be on freeing Meng Wanzhou on Tuesday, November 24th. You can find more information if you go to the World Beyond War website. They have excellent resources. Last week, they had this absolutely fantastic webinar on ending the war in Afghanistan. I encourage you to tune into that. They also have a peace pledge that you can sign and many other petitions that you can sign, including hosting a petition for us to call on the Canadian government to cancel the fighter jet procurement. We actually have an opportunity to stop Canada from buying new fighter jets. The Canadian government hasn't made a decision if it's going to buy the F-35, the Boeing Super Hornets, or the Saab Gripen. They're not going to make that decision for another year. So if we put adequate pressure, we can stop them. And World Beyond War is helping us. I'd also encourage people to check out the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace. We also host many excellent webinars, and we have petitions too that you can sign on. Another fantastic organization to follow is the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, which which profiles many progressive foreign policy activists, including Eve Engler, and they have a petition on their website calling on the Canadian government to have a fundamental reassessment of Canadian foreign policy. And then finally, I'd like to remind you about Labor Against the Arms Trade. Labor Against the Arms Trade has organized, this is led by Professor Simon Black at Brock University. We've organized 2 National Day of Actions to outside the General Dynamics plant in London to try to get them to stop building light armored vehicles that we're sending to Saudi Arabia and that are being used in this brutal war against Yemen. The next National Day of Action will be in January and will be part of an international solidarity action. So I encourage you to get involved in peace work as well. We really need you, and there's a lot of work to be done. Thanks.
Thank you, Tamara. Costas?
Yes, in fact, I think I'm not eligible enough to answer these questions because mainly require, a knowledge of the political and social situation in Canada. So what I'm going to say is that the struggle against militarism is something very important. It is part of our tradition. It is part of an anti-capitalist program. The military complex and the military economy is a very vital sector for capitalist economy. Is a third, we usually talk about the production of goods, the production of means of production, and now we talk about the production of means of destruction. So it is a very vital sector for the capitalist economy. Our first task is to organize workers in the military industrial complex. That's I think our first priority. And second is to think in terms of militarism as an ideology in the society, and therefore we also have to educate people against militarism and nationalism. So the 2 tasks are interconnected, organizing workers in the military sector, and third, combat militarism and nationalism and patriotism in a sense, also in the society as ideologies. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. Okay, Kathy?
Yeah, so thank you. So to respond to the question of how come I don't advocate for the abolishing of the police, well, I think I don't subscribe to that philosophy because I think we do need the police, but I just don't believe we need them in our schools. I believe that in defunding the police, so the $9 million, for example, that we used for annually for the SRO program, I think it should be reinvested into social programs. into programs that enhance opportunities for young people. I believe in preventative actions rather than waiting for our youth to get into trouble and then reacting. So I believe in being proactive. When you look, for example, at the SRO program in schools, you have, for example, cases where kids are being permanently traumatized by police officers. You have some police officers that are honing their skills on Black children primarily and Indigenous children. So they may trump up charges and they practice, for example, how to get somebody to confess to something they didn't do. They would, charge a kid and then knowing that they don't have a case and try to get them to go to some different, I forgot the name of it right now, a divergent program, I think it's called. So these are the things that I think that we need to eliminate from an educational system. I think it is very important that our youth are not targeted and not marginalized before they can even go out into the world. I also believe that educating our young people is the most important way for them to achieve and better their current circumstances. And by educating, I don't only need necessarily getting a skill. I believe in truly letting our young people be critical thinkers. And I think that is why our education system, a lot of the powers that be, don't want to have an educated populace, educated people, because it's harder to manipulate people when they are educated and they can see through the smoke, right? And I think that it is easier to mislead and sell your propaganda when you have an educated society. So my focus is on education and ensuring that all students get educated. And I think that in terms of defunding the police, I always say that if I am staring at the end of a barrel or somebody's about to harm me, the police is who I would look to call, because I'm not armed. I don't, so I would look for help if in those situations, but I don't think they belong in our schools. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Bren?
Sure thing. Well, I do feel the pressure to wrap up quickly, so I will do my best to get through
Sorry about
these
the pressure.
questions. Nah, no worries. So I am aware of the organization World Beyond War, and I'll defer to Tamer's comments on both that, as well as the vulnerable points of the military-industrial manufacturing sector. But I do want to say, as someone who lived in London, Ontario for 5 years, there's a broader context there that I think I hinted at earlier on, but I'd like to address a bit more specifically. So I mentioned that First Nations and Indigenous people, especially on reservations, tend to be locked out of the economy. They're not always locked out of the economy. In BC, oil companies are more than willing to give them tons of money. So in a sense, it becomes a devil's bargain. Sure, you can have a local economy and you can have good local jobs. It just has to come at the expense of the planet. And because we spent so long discriminating against them, taking their, I have to keep scrolling up to see the questions again, taking their jobs and that sort of thing, this is what we're left with. And in London, Ontario, it's much the same way. Car manufacturing has totally abandoned the city. When GM moved to close their plant, the Ontario government, despite having given the GM $2 billion to keep their manufacturing in Ontario, just said, oh, well, nothing we can do about it. They just gave up. They didn't even bother trying. That $2 billion bought them nothing. No sway, no stake in the companies, nothing. So when it comes down to it, General Dynamics is one of the few places left in London, Ontario, which will offer good paying jobs that are not knowledge economy based jobs, that are manufacturing jobs. So by proxy, they're pulled into defending militarism, because if those jobs disappear, they know that there is nothing to replace them. there is not going to be another factory that is making something ethically produced that's good for the people that will spawn overnight. Instead, it'll just be another massive 3,000 to 4,000 person job loss. So for us, if we want to really defeat the military-industrial complex, I think what we have to have an alternative. If we want to defeat all of these things that people are working on and towards, we have to have alternatives in place that are ready for them, so that they don't have to lose their jobs, so that they don't have to lose their incomes. So I think that that's sort of just a little bit of a missing piece that I wanted to add in, because like I said, I've lived in London, Ontario for a good amount of time. So I'm aware of the conditions there, and they're dire. There's a lot of poverty in London, Ontario. And a great deal of that is because those manufacturing jobs moved away. We just have to be ready with alternative prescriptions. We have to be ready with an alternative that can be brought in. It's the same with oil and gas. If we want to preserve those jobs, the best thing we can do is to come up with some kind of alternative industry that will pay a similar amount, that will still be unionized, that will still keep all those people on board. We have to build an economy that works for people, not for corporate profit. And that's how we build something long term. That's how we build something sustainable. So I want to thank you for all the questions. Can the speakers provide contact info for follow-up questions? Yes. So you can follow me on Twitter at Bryn Smith SWR. I can paste that into the mainline chat as well. That's the main public way that you can reach me. But I want to thank you for having me on. I want to thank all the other speakers, because I learned so much from listening to you all, and you're all amazing. So thank you.
Thank you, comrades. We are nearing the end of our first session. So I would like to thank all the participants, and a special thanks to our panelists, Kathy, Tamara, Costas, and Bryn. And also, just say before I leave you, a pause for the cause. If you would like to subscribe to our newspaper, Socialist Action newspaper, which will be delivered to your door for $27 for 1 year. Or maybe you would like to get our latest booklet, which is Democratize and Nationalize Scientific Publishing by Daniel Turade. So, and also, if you would like to talk to us at Socialist Action, just give us a call at 416, no, that's wrong, it's 647-986-1917, or you can reach us at www.socialistaction.ca. Or you can also reach us at socialistactioncanada@gmail.com. And maybe while you're there, you might see a link to funding. So if you would like to make a donation to offset some of the cost of our conference for webcasts, leafleting, and the different things that goes with it, or for us to continue in our work in the class struggle. So if you'd like to do that, you can also do it. And also, don't forget, if you like the webcasts, and the one tonight and the one coming and the ones we've been having every Thursday night, you can subscribe to the SA YouTube channel. That's the Socialist Action YouTube channel. And so we will see you all back here at 7 sharp tonight for the second session. And in the meantime, in between time, during the intermission, you can watch, if you so wish, videos, musical videos on the band Special Interest Group. So until 7, bye for now.